Let's cultivate our motivation. And with a mind that is delighted simply to be alive in a human body, let's make a strong determination to overcome our afflictions, because our afflictions keep us bound in misery, and on a daily basis they make us extremely unhappy. And let's make a strong resolve to generate bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness, so that we can overcome not only the afflictive obscurations but also the cognitive obscurations, for the benefit of all living beings, to be able to lead them also on the path to enlightenment. So it's very important for us to see our afflictions as the problem. Otherwise we go through life thinking other sentient beings and the environment are the problem. And in that way we create a lot of negative karma, getting upset at others, getting attached to what we like and lashing out at what we don't like. And so the afflictions, impede our happiness, make us do things that make others miserable. And these afflictions are underlain by the two demons of the self-grasping ignorance and, of course, our old pal, the self-centered thought. Self-grasping ignorance is the king, the self-centered thought is the minister of war that is pretending to be the minister of peace, but actually deceiving us. And, we've talked a lot about the faults of the self-centered mind, but it's really important to refresh our mind and continually think about this, and just to watch on a day-to-day basis, how sensitive and touchy we get because of the self-centered thought. You see that sometimes in yourself? We're so sensitive and touchy. Every small thing somebody says to us becomes quite a big thing in our mind. They're criticizing me. They think I'm an awful person. How dare they? Don't they understand? They clearly don't. And we get all worked up about these things that in the whole course of the evolution and devolution of the universe have no meaning, or some minuscule meaning. You know what I mean? These things that when we're in a good frame of mind, we can see they're just like tiny, teeny things. We don't even remember them, in a week or a month, let alone a year. And yet at that very moment, our mind is like so super sensitive to everything that it just explodes, in misery about some tiny, tiny thing, And so we're miserable, then we make the people around us miserable, then we create negative karma, then we experience more suffering, then we wonder why, nothing's happening in our practice. So I think it's helpful just to have this perspective that it's the self-centered thought that's the problem, And so to really see that and stop kind of coddling our self-centered mind. Do you know what I mean? How we coddle our self-centered mind? Yeah? I'm not saying that you go at it with a sledgehammer, because it's much too swift and wily, and going after it with a sledgehammer doesn't work. You know, you have to have, you know, some gentleness, some discreetness in the way you deal with it. But it's really a thief that steals away our joy and steals our virtue. Mm? And so rather than just coddling it and saying, oh, poor self-centered thought, somebody criticized you, poor baby, you didn't deserve that criticism at all, you're so sweet. You know, instead of doing that with our self-centered thought, you know, because what does a self-centered thought do when we coddle it? It just, you know, makes more havoc. It runs the show even more. It says, oh, I really tricked her. You know, she thinks I'm on her side. What can I do now to create some havoc? And then self-centered thought just, runs the show. Okay, so we have to really see how that works in our mind, you know? And then because we want to be happy and we want other people to be happy, then to, you know, say, self-centered thought, I see you. You're the thief coming in here. Don't you think you're going to pull one over on me? Okay, so we have to, you know, catch it. Otherwise, you know, like the donkey with the ring through their nose. We just follow it. Okay? So this teaching that we're having, the mind training like rays of the sun, is particularly, you know, pinpointing this self-centered thought, you know, and helping us to see that it's the real enemy, and then giving us tools to work with it. But it's really important to contemplate this and to feel it's the enemy, and then to apply the tools. Because otherwise, if we just sit and intellectually say, oh yes, self-centered thought, it's such a big problem, you know, it makes me very miserable, and oh yes, I do the taking and giving meditation to get rid of it. But this all remains at the level of words, but, you know, in fact, in our lives, we're just like this with our self-centered thought. You know, we don't challenge it at all. So, you know, let's not do that, because it just makes more problems for ourselves, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. So I think it could be good. You know how we often make lists of everything other people do wrong? You know, we can sit in our meditation, they did this, and they did this, and they did this. It might be very good, you know, take out a sheet of paper and a pen, make a list of all the faults of what your self-cherishing thought did, you know. It did this, and then it did that, and then it did the other thing. Yeah? And really see it, and realize that we are not union oneness with the self-centered thought. It is not who we are. Repeat! It is not who we are. Okay? So we have to see it as something there that's, you know, bugging us, and then do something about it. Okay? So, there were a few questions and comments from last week that I wanted to share. I think they were from last week. Sometimes I get all the weeks mixed up. Okay, so John wanted to share a reflection about the teaching last week. He said, I want to share with you a little story. A friend of mine, Mark, played goalie on several of the hockey teams I played on over the years. When we first started playing, I converted to defense because most of the guys wanted to play forward, and I just went ahead and played defense because the team needed me to. I was awful back then at first, and Mark was always yelling at me when I made mistakes. However, he was also very encouraging in the locker room after the games, and we really developed a nice friendship. He got cancer about 2 years ago, and he died this spring. Many people attended his funeral. I really didn't know what to do, so I sat on the meditation cushion and made prayers for him, and mentally decided to give away all of the merit I had accumulated so that he could have a fortunate rebirth. I was a little worried about doing this because I didn't want to lose my merit and end up in a hell realm. But at the time, I really was more worried about Mark, and I figured I was still alive to practice the Dharma and start accumulating merit again. Is that a nice thought? Tonight's lecture made me realize I did the right thing for him. But I learned one other thing, the importance of dedicating for all beings. Okay. And then you might remember that that John had shared with us before, sometimes that the idea of helping all sentient beings was so enormous, kind of like when he walked on the sand and there were so many clams, and what are you going to do? You know, you can't get all of them back in the ocean when they need to be. So he said, by the way, after my episode with the clams at the ocean, I came across a great saying from Mother Teresa, which kind of went like this: though what we do seems like a drop of water in the ocean is less without that one drop. Yeah? So sometimes it may seem that we're just doing some small positive action for somebody, that there's all these clams that are going to die and we can only throw, 10 of them back in the ocean. But every small thing we do is something helpful. And so not to diminish that, not to feel that, I can't save the world, so everything I do is useless. That's really rather extreme. But let's all do what we can. And if we all do what we're able to, then together, it becomes really something quite big and magnificent. Okay, then there was another question. Okay, if one feels good about giving, does that detract from the goodness of giving or of generosity? Is one supposed to have a neutral feeling towards giving, or can one at least perceive the good that the objects given will provide to those that receive them and take some positive feeling from that? Okay, so this kind of question comes a lot because I think in our culture we are so afraid that if we feel good after we do something that we're being selfish, as if feeling good is evil and sinful and selfish. That's a pretty nutty idea, isn't it? But, we're nuts. Yeah. But if you look at it, sure, when we do something virtuous, we should feel so happy and so rejoicing. Not like, I did a virtuous action, look at me. Not like that. But inside to say, wow, this human life, I've been taking and receiving so much from other beings who have been so kind to me. And here at one point, I actually, didn't have any self-centeredness and did something nice for somebody else. How wonderful. I'm so happy. I feel really good about this. Or we do some small thing for somebody, just a small favor, and the other person's pleased, and we say, wow, look, I was able to do something that made somebody else happy and that eased their day and gave them a little happiness. That's wonderful that I was able to do that. Okay? So yes, I think we should feel happy when we do something virtuous. Yeah? We shouldn't, we want to abandon attachment, but that's different than just rejoicing in virtue and feeling good and looking at somebody who's happy and saying, wow, I rejoice that they're happy. Yeah? You getting what I'm saying? Yeah? It's really, really something. This afternoon in our discussion group, we were talking about the advantages of living in community, and of course the disadvantages and what we don't like. But I was thinking, and I forgot to mention it, that one of the advantages is you directly see how other people change and grow, and you see how they start to generate more and more virtuous minds, and you start really taking delight and rejoicing in other people's Dharma practice, because you can see how they're really trying hard and really making progress. And so that's a delight that comes from living in community, that if you don't live in community, you don't know the people so well, and so you don't see those things, and you don't understand how hard they're really working. Okay, so yeah, rejoice at our own virtue, rejoice at others' virtue. Okay, we should feel happy. Where did we ever get this idea that we're more virtuous when we're miserable? Yeah, we should really change. If you have that kind of idea in your mind, do some research and where did I learn this from? Yeah, where did this idea come from that it's more virtuous if I feel miserable? Who taught me that? Yeah, or where did I pick it up? Yeah. And then you look at it and say, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Okay. Okay, then next question. Okay. So you said if we dedicate something mentally to sentient beings or to the Buddha, or if we just think about giving something to someone, but later we change our mind and we decide not to give it or to keep it for ourselves, then that is actually stealing, and that will be bad karma for ourselves. And so this person is saying, I think the same thing applies to the environment. Maybe we abuse resources by, sorry. Maybe we use, I have to get the right tone, I can't get it so easily. Maybe we abuse resources by using too many plastic bags from supermarkets. Okay? If we say in the prayer or just wish that our using of everything is for the benefit of sentient beings. Okay? So they're kind of questioning, I think this is a very excellent question. We say we're really working for the benefit of sentient beings, but when we use too many resources, we overconsume, we don't recycle, we don't reuse things, we just throw things away. Isn't that kind of like stealing from the shared resources of this planet, which have, are also going to belong to future generations? Yeah? Seems to me we could see it like that. Okay? So I think we should really make every effort to reduce consumption, to reuse things, to recycle things, to use things until they really get worn out. Yeah? And then that this is an act of kindness to the environment and to the sentient beings that we share the environment with. Yeah? And I really have to say, unfortunately, that sometimes Buddhist temples are the ones who really are least respectful to the environment, because, and I think it comes with any big organization, when you serve food, you don't want to have to do dishes, so you use paper plates, plastic plates, styrofoam cups, and then you eat and throw everything away. So that's easier, of course, and then you say, well, it's also good, it doesn't spread disease, but it really pollutes the earth. And so I think it's kind of better either that we get used to washing dishes, a little bit extra energy to wash dishes as a gift for future generations, or that when we do these big activities, we ask people to please bring their own dishes, and then they use them and take them home and wash them. When I was at Suchi Foundation in Singapore, wasn't it there? Yeah, they had these really, Suchi Foundation is a wonderful thing set up by a Chinese bhikshuni, They do worldwide relief services, and they've really done a lot to help the environment. They take plastic bottles and recycle them and make blankets out of them, and then give the blankets when they do the relief work in disaster areas. And they're gorgeous blankets. They're really nice and soft. And for all their volunteers, they have these, little bowls and containers that they make, and chopsticks. I think we brought back a pair that you have, foldable chopsticks. So you have your own cup, your own bowl, your own chopsticks that you carry with you. And so when you go to any Suchi function, you have these, you eat your food with everybody, you take them home and wash them, and it's very nice. Yeah? So I think that's quite good to do. Yeah? So that we become more aware of, cherishing things for the benefit of future generations. Okay, then the person continues by thinking, like, if we're practicing this meditation on mentally giving to sentient beings, because remember last week we were talking about we mentally give all of our possessions, so therefore when we use them, we should use them for the benefit of others because they actually belong to others. And we should, feel kind of the kindness of others when we use the things instead of thinking, this is mine, I can do with it what I want. So she's saying, if we practice this meditation and mentally give things away, and then we don't use them properly, aren't we creating bad karma? So implying maybe we shouldn't do the meditation, okay? Because maybe we shouldn't give them away mentally, because then we wouldn't create the bad karma of using them selfishly and taking them back for ourselves. So I don't think so. I think we should still do the meditation. Yeah, because if we practice and train ourselves in giving, then slowly, slowly our mind will begin to change. And so, okay, at the beginning, the self-centered thought may completely make us space out, and we forget that we're using things that actually belong to others, and we have a big sense of I when we use stuff that we've mentally offered. But slowly, if we continue to practice the meditation, we will become more mindful, we will become more aware, and the mind will start to change regarding this. Whereas if we're so afraid that we're going to create negative karma, by forgetting that we've given things, then we don't do the meditation, then we don't have this training in giving. And so that's a loss for us. I think it's very helpful to just train in giving, and then gradually our mind will be able to do it more and more. And then she also asked, is thinking about the bad things creating negative karma? In other words, can we create negative karma just by what we think? And she's saying, don't we have to actually do something? Isn't the actual negative karma when we say something, when we do something? Yeah, but, having bad thoughts in our mind doesn't create any karma. Not like that. Okay, if we look at the 10 non-virtues, the first 7 have to do with body and speech, but the last 3 have to do with our mind. So coveting, ill will, and wrong view. And so those are mental actions. So, but at the same time, they're rather extreme mental actions. In other words, it's not just a flash of attachment, it's actually coveting things that belong to somebody else. It's not just, a fraction of an angry thought passing through our mind. It's actually sitting down and thinking about how we want to get even and retaliate. Yeah, it's not just a mind that kind of has doubt about something, but it's a very well thought out, stubborn wrong view. But all of these things are done mentally, so they do create negative karma. Okay, so I hope I answered the questions from last week, okay. In the same way, we can create positive karma by just what we think, without necessarily saying and doing things. And that's what we're doing when we're doing this taking and giving meditation, because we're giving with our mind, and that's creating a lot of virtue. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And coveting in my mind has some implication in terms of jealousy. You kind of have these two things going together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing with when we do the 35 days practice in biology theory. These are representations of pride and miserliness.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like
No, the transformation of pride and miserliness.
yeah. So it seems like there's this relationship between like jealousy, pride, and miserliness or lack of generosity.
Yeah. Okay, so is there a relationship between miserliness, stinginess on one hand, and then pride and jealousy on the other? I think we can see some relationship. You know, if we're very attached to what we have, we're very proud about it, we want other people to see, and we don't want to give it away. Mm-hmm. Or sometimes we have something, we're very stingy, we don't want to share it, and we look at what everybody else has, and if they have more than we do, we get jealous. Yeah. So we often find, if we look at our afflictions, that one affliction can build very easily upon the next. They don't just necessarily happen as isolated events. Okay? You can start out with attachment, and then that leads you to anger, and that leads you to jealousy, and then from there, you know, you may space out getting lazy, which is, you know, part of confusion. So, yeah, when we look and watch the different mental events in our mind, we see how they, you know, one affliction can very easily lead to another one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I want to be clear about what I heard you just think I heard you say about the three mental pathways. Mm-hmm. Are you saying that the afflictions that are in mind have to be that strong in order to actually create negative karma?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the question is, do the afflictions in the mind have to be that strong to actually create negative karma? You know, certainly if you get a thought of jealousy in your mind, you know, it's certainly not good. Yeah. You know, there's going to be some negative impact. But here we're talking about the 10 non-virtues, where it's really going to be strong enough to throw a rebirth. And so to, you know, really be strong enough to throw a rebirth, it's not just a passing thought in your mind. It's something, you know, where you're sitting there fostering that thought in some way or another. Okay? Okay, shall we go on in the text? Okay, so, yeah, we were talking about you know, how we should practice like the bodhisattvas do, mentally giving away everything that is merely labeled mine, and then thinking it belongs to others, and because of that, then using it wisely, using it kindly, using it respectfully, and for the benefit of others. You know, and I think if we really practice that, we will really, you know, cut down on our consumption and recycle and so on. Because instead of just thinking, oh, this is mine, I can throw it away if I feel like it, yeah, we think, oh, this actually belongs to sentient beings. Do the sentient beings want me to just throw this away or use this recklessly? Well, no, because if I do so, it pollutes the environment, and it just, you know, destroys the environment that they live in. Okay? So it does make us more careful with how we use things and what we use. Okay, so we should use things by thinking, I shall use these with the intention of protecting both the possessions and their owner, the owner being other sentient beings. Okay, so this is similar to the case of a slave who always in the service of his master has no belongings of his own. So of course we don't like this example. You know, slavery is not cool. But if you think about it, you know, if we've really made the point in our life that others' happiness is more important than what our own self-centered thought wants, then we should have that attitude of, sentient beings are more important, and so I take care of them first, okay? I don't keep things for myself. You might think that it is futile to dedicate your possessions to others since you are using them yourself. So somebody could think, what's this Mickey Mouse game I'm giving my possessions to others mentally? I mean, let's be truthful. I'm still using them, okay? But the author says this is not so, because the above text, which is Compendium of Trainings, that's another text by Shantideva, says, some who have not realized suchness lose faith in bodhisattvas who practice in that way. This is unreasonable because such bodhisattvas have a thorough realization of the munificent thought of giving. It is therefore inappropriate for others to have doubts about how they behave. Okay? So people who haven't realized emptiness, who, are not very astute in terms of the path, if they see a bodhisattva who is, mentally saying, I give everything to others, and then using those things themselves, those people lose faith, as if they expect the bodhisattva to not use anything, That's kind of unreasonable, but that doesn't stop people from thinking that. But the author says that that's unreasonable because these bodhisattvas, they really understand the benefits of giving. They, have a realization of emptiness. There's not selfishness in their actions of using things that they have dedicated for others. So it's really inappropriate to have this thought criticizing them. Okay? Now we come to the meditation on compassion. Okay? So remember, the definition of compassion is the wish for sentient beings, including ourselves, to be free of suffering and the cause of suffering. And suffering here, dukkha, it doesn't just mean ouch suffering. It isn't just the dukkha of pain, but it's the dukkha of change, which is what we call generally pleasure in our limited experience, and the dukkha of conditioning. In other words, taking a body and mind under the influence of afflictions and karma. Okay? So now I shall explain the benefits of meditation on compassion, repeated contemplation of which will increase your delight in it. Okay? And then he gives this quote from the supplement to Nagarjuna's treatise on the Middle Way. And the supplement was written by Chandrakirti, who lived in the 7th century India, a great, great sage. And in his introduction, before he even began the text, he praised great compassion. And I taught these verses at some of the previous Cloud Mountain retreats. So if you look online, people who look online, you can find them there. Oh, also I want to say, people who want more to read about this taking and giving meditation, please get Geshe Champa Tekchok's book, Transforming Adversity into Joy and Courage. It's published by Snow Lion, and it's an excellent book, and chapter 11 explains this really, really well, in a very complete, detailed way. Okay, so the quote from Chandrakirti goes, compassion alone is seen as the seed of a conqueror's rich harvest, as water for development, and as ripening in a state of long enjoyment. Therefore, at the start, I praise compassion. Okay? So, a conqueror is a Buddha, so-called a conqueror because of having conquered all the afflictions and cognitive obscurations. Okay? So compassion is seen as the seed of the conqueror's harvest. Okay? The conqueror's harvest is clearly enlightenment and all the wonderful qualities of a Buddha, but it's compassion which starts that whole process out. It's compassion that's the seed. So you need the seed before you can have the harvest. Okay? So we generate compassion, at the beginning of our bodhisattva practice, because compassion is really the seed that is going to sprout and grow into everything good in terms of our relationships with sentient beings. Okay? So it's important, if we admire the Mahayana path, if we admire Buddha and we want to become like the Buddha, then to generate compassion, because it's the seed from which all the other good qualities are going to grow. Okay? So it's also water for development. So once you plant the seed, it needs to get watered. If you don't water it, you're not going to get a harvest. Okay? So we start out the bodhisattva practice with compassion, thinking of others' suffering, wanting them to be free of it, thinking of their kindness, wanting to reach out and benefit them. So that gets us going on the bodhisattva path. But then we have to keep going once we've gotten going. It's like you start the car, but you got to keep the gas pedal down, because if you don't, then it fizzles, doesn't it? So, or you have to not just plant the seed, but you have to water it so it's going to grow. So in the middle, as we're doing the bodhisattva practices, it's very, very important to remember compassion and to meditate on compassion, because that gives us the juice to really keep going and benefiting sentient beings. Okay? So we shouldn't just think, okay, I have compassion, now I'm going to practice generosity, ethical conduct, and we forget about meditating on compassion. Because if we do that, because our compassion isn't firm, it'll fizzle. And so we have to really continually meditate on it again and again and again. And in that way also, we develop the patience and the fortitude to continue being compassionate, even when others don't act the way we think they should act, okay, and even when they don't appreciate our compassion. Yeah. So it's really important to water the good seeds in our mind and to continually do these meditations, not just do them a little bit and then think we have them mastered. Okay? So it's the water for development, it's the seed, it's the water for development, and it's the harvest, because it ripens in a state of long enjoyment. So the long enjoyment is Buddhahood. Okay? And so clearly the Buddha has compassion. It isn't that you practice compassion, become a Buddha, and forget your compassion. Okay? The whole reason that the Buddha became a Buddha is due to compassion. So clearly a Buddha's compassion is really something that's going to bring long, long results. Because once somebody becomes a Buddha, their beneficial actions for the sake of sentient beings never ends until samsara ends. So they never get fatigued, they don't get compassion burnout, they don't get stressed out because there's too much on their plate. They, have the ability to deal with all of this. And because of their strong compassion, and so they're able to keep working for sentient beings no matter what happens. Okay? So we want to become like that, don't we? So got to meditate on compassion. Then with regard to its practical value, the Compendium of Perfect Doctrine says, and there's quite a long quote, O subduer. So somebody's speaking to the Buddha and they're calling the Buddha subduer because he has subdued the obscurations. Bodhisattvas do not train in many teachings. Actually, bodhisattvas train in a lot of teachings. But they're saying that you'll see the context in which they say that bodhisattvas don't train in many teachings. Actually, they train in a lot. Okay? Because our mind is very complicated, so it takes many different kinds of meditations and techniques to deal with our complicated mind. O subduer, if they perfectly grasp and accomplish one doctrine, they have enlightenment in the palms of their hands. If you ask, what is that doctrine? It is great compassion. So it looks like bodhisattvas only practice one thing, great compassion, and that one doctrine will give them enlightenment. Okay. Well, it's not that just compassion alone gives you enlightenment, but compassion leads you automatically to do all the other vast array of bodhisattva activities. Okay? Without that motivation of compassion, we're not going to do all the other bodhisattva activities. So when they say that the bodhisattvas don't do many practices and it's one doctrine, it's compassion. But compassion is like the jet engine that then, opens up into this whole spectacular array of all the different things that bodhisattvas do to develop their own mind and to be of benefit to sentient beings. Okay? So it all comes out of compassion, which is quite something when you think about it, When you think about how us ordinary beings, kind of what gives us the juice to do things, it's usually our self-centered mind, I want this, therefore I have enough energy to go and get it. Whereas for a bodhisattva, it's just compassion that just, naturally pushes them along. Okay? Okay, O subduer, if you have great compassion, you have all doctrines in the palm of your hand. So if you have great compassion, you have the juice to practice everything. O subduer, it is similar, for example, to the precious wheel of a universal monarch, around which all other forces gather. So a universal monarch has a precious wheel through which he can control all the other forces. Yeah. So compassion is like that. Yeah. It's like a magnet, it pulls everything good towards it. O subduer, similarly, wherever the great compassion of a bodhisattva exists, there also exists the Buddha's doctrine. Yeah. O subduer, likewise, wherever the life faculty is present, there also are the sense faculties. Okay. O subduer, thus if you have great compassion, you will acquire all the other qualities of a bodhisattva. So just as when you have the life faculty present, then you have all the other senses there. When you have the great compassion, then you have the doctrine of the Buddha, and then all the other virtuous qualities are also gradually going to come there and be present there by the power of that compassion. Okay? Because compassion just pushes you, to be a benefit to sentient beings. There's sometimes in certain prayers about bodhisattva's compassion, they talk about the bodhisattva being attached to sentient beings. They use the same word chakpa that is usually translated as desire or attachment, but here it means compassion, or love. It's the mind that is attached to the attached in quotes, has compassion for the welfare of living beings and can't abandon that thought. Okay? So they use the word attachment. It clearly doesn't mean attachment, but it has that same connotation of, you can't put it down, You really sincerely care about sentient beings, and you can't just walk away from it. The mind is glued there. Okay? Usually with attachment, we say attachment is like a bubblegum mind. It's very sticky. Once we're attached to something, it's like, gorilla glue, and we can't separate from it. Yeah, it gets very painful, doesn't it, when you have to separate? It tears off our flesh because the gorilla glue is there. Well, in the same way, the bodhisattvas are attached to sentient beings with compassion. In other words, they can't just ignore sentient beings, put them down, and forget about it and get distracted towards something else. Okay? So it's quite, I remember one phrase to forearm Chenrezig that's so beautiful that way, that talks about Chenrezig, being attached by compassion to sentient beings. Really very beautiful. Okay, so if we have that compassion, all the other bodhisattva activities are going to happen. So compassion meditation has two parts. Taking suffering or dukkha from the inhabitants, the sentient beings, and second, taking suffering or unsatisfactoriness, dukkha, from the environment in which these beings live. Okay? So we're going to first start with taking the dukkha from the inhabitants, from the living beings. And here the text says, and here we come back to the root text of the seven-point training of the mind, and the line says, giving and taking should be practiced alternately, and you should begin by taking from yourself. Okay, so we practice giving and taking alternately. In other words, we take on the suffering of others, we give them our happiness. Yeah, and then we take on the suffering of others, we give them our happiness. This can be a difficult meditation to do, especially if we think of taking on others' suffering, because we don't like any suffering at all. Any of the three kinds of dukkha, of pain, of change, of conditioning, we don't want any of it. Yeah, so the idea of taking it on can be a little bit uncomfortable. So it's very good to start taking on dukkha from ourselves in the future. Because we care, let's be honest, we care about ourselves more than anybody else. Okay, we're the most important one in our world. So by habituating ourselves to take on our own suffering, it gets us familiar with that idea. Okay? Because, if we've created the karma to have misery, that dukkha is going to come, isn't it? Okay? So here we practice, it's going to come to us anyway if we don't purify. So here we practice just accepting that and taking it. Okay? And so I think one of the benefits of doing this meditation is we really begin to accept our own pain and misery instead of going like this and pushing everything away. And this is something that Venerable Semkhe, in your little story about your illness that you spoke about how when you were so sick you were just like, I don't want this, I don't like it, get it away, this body's making me miserable. And you said how you realized that you were running away from yourself. You couldn't offer yourself any compassion. You couldn't accept your own situation, which was happening. Once the karma's ripening and you're sick and it's happening, to reject what's happening doesn't do any good because the karma's ripening and it's happening. So this is a big thing she learned. Yeah. About, just accepting what your situation is. So this meditation of thinking of taking on our own suffering develops that kind of acceptance of our situation in us, instead of pushing it away and I don't like it and I don't want it and this is unfair and it's somebody else's fault and the universe owes me better, because that whole way of thinking causes so much more misery, doesn't it? And you've done hospice work and you've seen, when people are resisting it, like, I don't like this, then the death is so much more difficult for them. Yeah? When there's some kind of grace and acceptance of the situation, then, then the death becomes so much gentler and smoother and easier, not so much torment in it. Okay? So we can see this, with any kind of situation we're in. How often, when we reject the reality of what's happening, we become more miserable. So this meditation of taking on our own suffering in the future helps us learn to accept that suffering instead of always pushing things away. Okay? Okay, so Namkapel says, so firstly, as it says, we should meditate on compassion by taking from sentient beings their sufferings and the causes of their sufferings. Begin by taking upon yourself all your own actions, that's karma, and disturbing emotions, that means afflictions, and all the sufferings that you will have to experience as a result in future lives in any of the 5 or 6 states of existence. They say 5 or 6 because you can describe the realms as 5 realms or as 6 realms. Okay? And so how do you do this? Imagine taking on all the suffering of your future life. You know, and here he's starting it out with the suffering of future lives, but he also gets us to the suffering of just tomorrow and, you know, the next day. So, okay, here's the visualization as it's described. So imagine that these sufferings form black heaps similar to trimmings of hair upon your present mental and physical aggregates. Okay, so what this means, is if you're talking to an audience of monks in Tibet, they're very familiar with you shave your hair and there's clumps of dark hair all over the place. Okay, so they're saying like taking that and putting that, you know, imagining that as your own suffering in the form of that hair and that coming into you. This is the first time I've heard the visualization described like that. I usually have heard it described as, you know, when we take on the suffering, it's in the form of pollution or smog or, you know, some kind of disgusting substance, something like that. So here what we would do is visualize ourselves in our future life, or as we come to it later on, just, you know, ourself of tomorrow, ourself of next year, you know. But visualize ourselves. Generate a feeling of compassion for ourselves. You know, wow, here's this sentient being, wants to be happy, doesn't want to suffer, but overwhelmed by afflictions. They've created negative karma and haven't purified, and this dukkha is going to arrive to them, and I want to help them. So we're looking at ourselves as if we were a third person, but developing compassion for ourselves. And then imagining taking on that suffering. You know, here as hair trimmings, but I much prefer taking it on as pollution. Okay? I find that little hair trimmings is pretty yucky. So maybe you want to do that. I don't know. Okay, and you think that you are thereby freed from these suffering and their causes in future lives. So your present self takes on the afflictions and the karma and the suffering, you know, from future lives. You take this on yourself. You use it to destroy your own present self-centeredness. Okay, and then you think that by having this compassion for your future self, that then your future life is going to be free of suffering and you feel happy. So you see how this is a skillful way to get us into the feeling something like this, you know. Like I said, because it's hard to think of taking from other people, so we think of taking from ourselves. And we think, oh, you know, I'm going to free my future self from suffering. This is good, you know, because I don't want my future self to have a lot of suffering and obstacles. So I'm going to, you know, I'm going to be courageous now and take all that suffering and all those afflictions, all that karma upon myself right now. Yeah, and use it to destroy my own self-centeredness and self-grasping ignorance right now. Okay. Similarly, imagine that you accept the suffering and sources of suffering of tomorrow, the day after that, the coming months and years, and the rest of your life upon your present temporary aggregates of today, this month, and this year, and think that you thereby free yourself from all misery from tomorrow onwards. Okay? So you don't just take on the suffering of future lives, but if you think tomorrow I have to go to the dentist, yeah, or I have to do some unpleasant task or meet some unpleasant person. So the suffering I'm going to experience tomorrow by doing that, I'm taking all of that upon me right now so that my tomorrow self is going to be free of that. Okay? And so you do this. It's quite good to do, actually, when you have pain, when you're sick, when there's a situation coming up that you really don't want to deal with, that you don't like. Yeah, you have to go to some meeting with some disagreeable people, or you have to do some activity that you really don't like, where the mind has all this pushing away and unacceptance of it. To say, okay, there's my future self that's going to be suffering. I'm going to take that suffering away from my future self out of compassion. Okay? And so you take that in the form of pollution. As you take the pollution, it doesn't just come and sit inside of you and make you more polluted. There's no use in that. But you think of your self-centered thought and your afflictions and self-grasping ignorance as like a lump in your heart. And as you take this pollution, it can either become like a thunderbolt that destroys that lump at your heart. It can become like soap that cleanses out and dissolves the lump at your heart. Whatever kind of image you want to give to it, I think is okay. But the idea is that you're taking on your own future suffering, and it's stopping your present self-centeredness, which is the cause of a lot of your own misery. Okay? So it's very important when you do this that you don't just take on the suffering and sit there with it, but you use it to get rid of the self-centeredness and afflictions. Okay? So, questions about anything? Yeah.
With doing this practice, you have to have a real strong cultivation or theologic engagement sort of self-clarity.
Mm-hmm.
I find it when I do it, then I have to give it to somebody.
Right.
But he's gone now.
Okay. So you're saying that when you do the taking and giving meditation, you find that it's very important to really have a sense of that self-centeredness, so that when you take on the suffering, there it is, and you can directly attack it, or you can directly dissolve it. Whereas if it's just this vague sense of self-centeredness, then it's very easy to say, I'm taking on the pollution, and I'm the problem. Yeah? Because we always have this sense of I here. No, it's not the conventional self that's the problem. It's the self-centeredness. Okay? So I think you're very correct there in that, we have to really identify what it is that we want to dissolve or eliminate there. Yeah. Other questions? No? Okay, so this is good meditation to do this week, huh? Okay. So just start out with yourself and take on your own future confusion, your future dilemmas, your future suffering, and really feel that when you do this, that, the self of tomorrow or the self of next week, next month, next life, that you just feel, okay, I've eliminated that suffering from my future self. And then you just stop worrying about what's going to happen to you in the future. And if something frightful seems to happen, you say, I'm just taking, instead of sitting there ruminating and proliferating bad stories, you say, whatever happens, I accept it. I take that suffering upon myself to free my future self of that misery. Okay? So it's very, actually very good antidote for fear. Mm-hmm.